After her mother, who lived modestly her entire life, died of cancer, Arya Namani lost everything she thought she could rely on. Her husband began pulling away. Her best friend stayed a little too close. And 3 months later, when Arya finally unlocked the box her mother warned her never to share with anyone, she realized the truth. She had never been powerless. She had been protected. And the people who betrayed her had no idea what was coming. Welcome to Stories by Jason. If you're settled in and ready for a good story, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I've got another exciting story coming your way tomorrow, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Thank you so much for the love and support. You're truly appreciated, and I'm so grateful to have you here with me. Also, let me tell you something funny. Someone actually bet that I can't reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of this year, and honestly, I want to prove them wrong. So if you're watching this right now and you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button and join the family. Reaching 1,000 subscribers is a very personal goal for me, and your support would mean the world to me. Thank you for believing in me and being part of this journey. And before you go, drop your name and location in the comments. I'd love to give you a special shout-out in my next video. Rain traced slow, uneven paths down the tall windows of Clearwater General Hospital, blurring the city lights into streaks of silver and gray. Arya Namani sat alone in the waiting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap, as if holding herself together required constant pressure. She hadn't slept in nearly 2 days. Across the corridor, behind a pair of closed double doors, her mother was dying. The machines hummed softly, too calmly for what they represented. Each beep felt intrusive, mechanical, indifferent to the way Arya's chest tightened every time the sound faltered. 3 months ago, Leora Namani had been arguing with her over tea about whether lemon weakened the flavor. Now, cancer had reduced her to a fragile figure beneath white sheets and tangled wires. Arya leaned her head back against the wall and closed her eyes. Please hold on, she thought. Just a little longer. Her phone vibrated. She already knew who it was before she looked. Dorian, still at the hospital? I'm heading out with some friends. Don't wait up. No, how is she? No, do you need me there? Not even a pretense of concern. Arya stared at the message, her thumb hovering above the screen. She typed OK, then deleted it. Typed she's not doing well. Deleted that, too. In the end, she locked the phone and turned it face down, as if that could silence the disappointment tightening her throat. This wasn't new, not really. Over the past few weeks, Dorian had become distant in subtle ways. Late nights. Vague explanations. A kind of emotional vacancy that hurt more than anger ever could. She had told herself it was stress. Everyone handled loss differently. But sitting there alone, listening to the rain batter the glass, Arya felt something colder settle in her stomach. Across from her, Talia shifted in her seat. Her best friend of nearly 20 years held a box of tissues on her lap, fingers fidgeting along the cardboard edge. She offered Arya a sympathetic smile, too quick, too rehearsed. I can grab you another coffee if you want, Talia said softly. You've barely touched that one. I'm fine, Arya replied, though her voice sounded distant even to herself. Talia nodded, her gaze lingering for a moment longer than necessary. There was something in her expression Arya couldn't quite name. Concern, maybe, but layered with something else. Tension. Anticipation. Arya looked away. A nurse appeared at the end of the hallway and glanced down at her clipboard. Ms. Namani? Arya stood immediately, her legs unsteady beneath her. You can come in now. Talia rose as well. I'll come with you. Arya shook her head gently. I need a moment. Alone. Talia hesitated, then stepped back. I'll be right here. The hospital room smelled sterile and cold. Leora lay still, her once sharp eyes dulled by exhaustion, her breathing shallow and uneven. Arya crossed the room in silence and took her mother's hand. Mama, she whispered. Leora's fingers tightened weakly around hers. Her eyes fluttered open. Arya, she breathed, the word barely audible. I'm here. For a long moment, Leora only stared at her, as if memorizing her face. Then she spoke again, each word measured, deliberate, urgent. Vault, she whispered. 5th Street Branch. Box 892. Arya leaned closer, heart pounding. The key, Leora continued, her voice trembling. In my locket. The pause. No one else. Arya swallowed hard. What's in the box? But Leora only shook her head faintly. Promise me, she whispered. I promise, Arya said, tears blurring her vision. I promise. Leora's grip loosened. The monitor let out a sharp, continuous sound. Doctors rushed in. Voices overlapped. Orders were shouted. Arya was gently pulled back, her hands empty, her body numb. At 10:32 p.m., Leora nominee was pronounced dead. The rain had turned heavier by the time Arya stepped outside. It soaked through her coat as if it didn't exist, but she barely noticed. Talia wrapped an arm around her shoulders, murmuring condolences, guiding her toward the car. Arya let herself lean into the support, but somewhere deep inside, a quiet, unfamiliar question began to form. Why did her mother need secrets? And why did it feel like everything she thought she knew was already slipping away? 3 months later, standing in front of a nondescript bank on 5th Street with her mother's locket clenched in her palm, Arya would finally understand what Leora had been protecting her from. But for now, all she had was grief, unanswered questions, and the growing realization that the people closest to her were no longer who she believed them to be. 3 months later, Arya stood on 5th Street with her coat pulled tight around her, the city humming indifferently around her grief. The bank looked unremarkable, gray stone facade, polished brass doors, a discreet sign that blended into the block. If not for her mother's last words, Arya would have walked past it 100 times without a second glance. Now, it felt impossibly heavy, as if every step toward the entrance pulled her deeper into something she didn't yet understand. Her fingers closed around the locket at her throat. She hadn't opened it since the night her mother died. In the sterile quiet of her bedroom that morning, Arya had finally unclasped the delicate chain. Inside, nestled where a tiny photo should have been, was a slender brass key, worn smooth, unmistakably old. Holding it had sent a shiver through her, equal parts fear and anticipation. No one else. Leora's voice echoed as clearly as if she were standing beside her now. Inside the bank, the air smelled faintly of paper and polish. A woman at the front desk glanced up with professional politeness. I'm here to access a safety deposit box, Arya said, her voice steadier than she felt. Of course. May I see your ID? The process was efficient, impersonal. No raised eyebrows. No knowing looks. Just signatures, a clipboard, and a quiet escort down a narrow corridor lined with numbered metal doors. The vault was colder than the rest of the bank. The kind of cold that settled into your bones. The attendant stopped in front of a small box midway down the wall. Box 892. Arya nodded, her pulse loud in her ears. The woman inserted her master key, then gestured for Arya to use hers. The brass key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting all this time. With a soft click, the box came free. I'll give you privacy, the attendant said, already stepping away. Arya carried the box to a small table and sat down. For a moment, she only stared at it, her hands resting on the cool metal. Whatever is in here, she thought, Mama believed it would protect me. She opened the lid. Inside was a single manila envelope, thick and neatly labeled in her mother's familiar handwriting. For Arya. Her breath caught. She slid the contents onto the table, one document at a time, and felt the world tilt. Property deeds. Stock certificates. Trust agreements. Corporate filings. International accounts. The numbers were staggering. Not just millions. Not even billions. Trillions. Arya pressed a hand to her mouth as the truth crashed over her in waves. The modest house. The careful budgeting. The way her mother had always insisted on simplicity. It hadn't been necessity. It had been strategy. At the bottom of the envelope lay a folded letter. Arya's hands trembled as she opened it. My dearest Arya, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are standing at the threshold of a life I worked very hard to keep hidden from you until the right moment. Everything you see here was built quietly, deliberately, and always with one purpose, your safety. Power attracts predators. Wealth invites betrayal. I wanted you to grow strong without being hunted. These assets are held in trusts and structures designed to protect you from exposure and manipulation. You will find names attached, people you can trust. They will teach you what I could not say out loud. Be patient. Be observant. And above all, never reveal what you don't need to. You are stronger than you know. Mama. Arya sat back slowly, the letter resting in her lap. Her mother hadn't just left her money. She had left her armor. The days that followed passed in a strange blur. Arya moved through her routine as if underwater, going to work, coming home, answering Dorian's increasingly infrequent messages with vague replies. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest, a secret humming with potential. And then, one afternoon, everything shattered. Arya left work early, a dull headache pressing behind her eyes. She hadn't told Dorian she'd be home. Lately, it felt easier that way, less explaining, fewer questions. The house was quiet when she stepped inside. Too quiet. She set her bag down and moved toward the kitchen, and stopped. Dorian stood by the counter, his back half-turned. Talia was there too, close enough that their bodies nearly touched. Then he reached for her. Not accidentally. Not hesitantly. Talia laughed softly as he pulled her into him, her hands settling against his chest like they belonged there. Arya's breath caught in her throat. For a split second, the world narrowed to the sound of her own heartbeat. The shock wasn't loud, it was cold. Precise. Like something snapping cleanly in two. Neither of them noticed her. Arya took a slow step back, then another, retreating down the hallway without a sound. She slipped out the front door, her movements careful, controlled, as if any sudden motion might cause her to break apart completely. Outside, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. The grief came first, sharp and burning. Then anger, hot, immediate. And then, unexpectedly, something else. Clarity. They had made their choice. So would she? That night, Arya didn't confront them. She didn't cry. She didn't scream or demand explanations she no longer needed. Instead, she sat at her dining table long after midnight, the documents from the vault spread out before her. She read everything, line by line, clause by clause. She learned how trusts insulated ownership, how shell companies could move silently through markets, how influence didn't need a face or a name. A week later, she met them. 3 individuals her mother had named in the letter: estate managers, legal architects, people who spoke in calm tones and precise language. They didn't look surprised when Arya introduced herself. "We've been expecting you," one of them said gently. They didn't overwhelm her. They taught her. Slowly. Methodically. They showed her how Leora had structured her empire, how every asset was layered, protected, and designed to be activated only when Arya was ready. "You don't need to act," one advisor told her. "You need to observe." Arya nodded, absorbing every word. Her heartbreak didn't disappear. But it changed shape. It sharpened. She began to understand the true scope of what she held, not just money, but leverage. Options. Power that didn't announce itself. And as Dorian and Talia grew bolder in their betrayal, unaware of the shift happening beneath their feet, Arya felt something settle into place inside her. Patience. They thought she was still grieving. They had no idea she was planning. By the time they realized the rules had changed, Arya nominee would already be several moves ahead. And this time, she wouldn't need anyone's permission to win. By the time Arya understood the full reach of her mother's empire, she also understood something far more important. Power didn't announce itself. It positioned itself. The revelation didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly, in boardrooms that didn't bear her name, in documents that listed shell companies instead of faces, in conversations where influence moved through implication rather than command. Leora had designed it that way. A system meant to be used, not admired. Arya listened. She watched. She learned. And when she was ready, she moved. The consulting firm Dorian worked for had always seemed stable from the outside. Mid-sized, well-networked, built on reputation rather than innovation. It was exactly the kind of company that thrived on confidence and collapsed under scrutiny. Arya didn't touch it directly. Instead, a newly formed investment entity, one of many her mother had prepared years ago, acquired a minority stake through a quiet funding round. The paperwork passed through 3 intermediaries before it ever reached the firm's records. No alarms. No headlines. At the same time, another holding company began purchasing shares in a hospitality group that quietly controlled several boutique hotels along the West Coast. One of them bore Talia's name. The irony wasn't lost on Arya. From her apartment, she tracked it all on a tablet late at night, tea growing cold beside her. She never smiled. Satisfaction wasn't sharp or triumphant, it was steady, controlled. The first directive was simple: transparency. Audits were introduced under the guise of optimization. Performance reviews framed as growth initiatives. Consultants brought in to streamline operations. Dorian mentioned it over dinner one evening, irritation slipping through his tone. "They're overcomplicating things," he said, scrolling through his phone. "We were doing fine." Arya nodded mildly. Change can feel disruptive. He glanced at her, then away again. He didn't see the calm in her expression. The calculation. At Talia's hotel chain, the story was similar. Vendor contracts were reviewed. Staffing costs questioned. Management meetings ran longer, tenser. Talia complained during their sporadic coffee meetups, her voice tight with frustration. "I don't know who's pushing this," she said, "but it's like they're looking for reasons to find fault." Arya stirred her drink slowly. "Maybe they are." Talia laughed, uneasy. "Well, they won't find anything serious. I've built this place from the ground up." Arya said nothing, because she knew what audits always found. The cafe was neutral ground, public, bright, unremarkable. A place where scenes couldn't be made without witnesses. Arya chose it deliberately. She arrived early and took a seat near the window, folding her hands around a warm cup of coffee. When Dorian and Talia walked in together, she didn't look surprised. They froze when they saw her. Talia recovered first. "Arya," she said, forcing a smile. "We didn't know you'd be here." "I did," Arya replied calmly. Dorian cleared his throat. "We were just—" "Congratulations," Arya said, cutting in gently. They stared at her. "Your engagement," she continued. "The photos were lovely." Talia's face drained of color. Dorian stiffened, his jaw tightening. "You saw that?" he asked. Arya smiled faintly. "It's a small internet." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "I hope you'll be very happy," Arya said, standing. "You both deserve exactly what you're building." There was something in her tone, not anger, not bitterness, but certainty. It unsettled them more than shouting ever could. As she walked away, Arya felt the final thread of her old life slip free. She didn't look back. The changes began to compound. At Dorian's firm, a major client pulled out after an audit revealed misaligned deliverables. Another demanded restructuring of the consulting team. Dorian's projects were reassigned temporarily. At Talia's hotels, occupancy dipped after a delayed renovation caused by a supplier dispute. A key investor asked pointed questions during a quarterly review. None of it was catastrophic. That was the point. Arya understood momentum. How small destabilizations, introduced at the right intervals, could unravel even the most confident structures. She watched from a distance as tension carved lines into Dorian's face. As Talia grew sharper, more defensive, snapping at staff. Meanwhile, Arya grew quieter, more composed. She repeated her mother's words like a mantra: "Be patient. Be observant." Her anger hadn't vanished. It had been refined. The final shift came not with a dramatic reveal, but with an invitation. A closed-door board meeting. An anonymous shareholder briefing. A signature on a document that changed everything. Arya attended none of it in person. When Dorian finally realized the scale of what was happening, it was too late. Control had already slipped from his hands. Decisions were being made above him, around him, without his input. Talia sensed it too, an invisible pressure tightening, a presence she couldn't identify. They had betrayed Arya believing she was weak. They never imagined she was watching. As Chapter 3 closes, Arya stands fully transformed, not as a woman driven by revenge, but as one guided by precision. The game was no longer emotional. It was strategic, and it had only just begun. The morning sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long golden streaks across the open-plan penthouse. Arya Nominee stood at the balcony, coffee in hand, the city of Seattle stretching endlessly below her. The space was breathtaking, sleek, modern, a testament to her new life. Each piece of furniture, each curated art piece, reflected not just wealth, but taste, control, and the deliberate choices she now embraced. It had been months since the storm had begun. Months since Dorian's callousness and Talia's betrayal had left her reeling. And yet here she was, alive, thriving, and untouchable. The grief that had once clouded her vision had transformed into clarity. She breathed in the crisp air, feeling the weight of her mother's legacy settle over her like a shield, not a burden. Her phone buzzed, a news alert. She didn't need to open it to know the headlines. Dorian's consulting firm had lost two of its largest clients, both citing management instability and unforeseen structural changes. Another alert detailed Talia's boutique hotel chain, negative reviews, canceled partnerships, and an investor pulling out overnight. Their missteps weren't coincidences. They were the quiet, calculated results of Arya's strategic influence behind the scenes. A smile curved her lips. Justice, she realized, didn't always need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes, it whispered in the collapse of arrogance, in the invisible tightening of the leash that only she held. Moving into the penthouse had been the first step of her rebirth. Every detail, from the custom kitchen to the glass-walled office where she reviewed her mother's trusts, was carefully chosen. She had met with estate managers, legal advisors, and financial strategists over the past months, learning the intricate threads of Liora Namani's empire. Every trust, every share, every offshore account had been meticulously planned to empower Arya, and she had executed her mother's guidance flawlessly. But wealth alone was never her goal. Liora had impressed upon her the importance of legacy, of impact. The scholarship fund she established in her mother's name reflected that vision. Named the Liora Namani Foundation for Empowered Futures, it offered full scholarships to first-generation students across the country, focusing on women in technology, business, and the arts. Arya smiled as she signed the first round of scholarship awards. The letters, the biographies, the dreams of these students, it was tangible proof that her mother's fortune could transform more than her own life. Each scholarship was a ripple in a larger wave, a reminder that power was most potent when wielded with purpose, not vindictiveness. The penthouse had become her sanctuary, but also her command center. Screens displayed financial reports, updates on corporate boards, and discreet alerts about Dorian and Talia's missteps. She rarely needed to intervene directly. Her influence worked quietly, efficiently, like a shadow that Dorian and Talia could feel but never fully see. It wasn't long before the first signs of collapse became public. Dorian had been a rising star in his industry, known for his charm and networking skills, but arrogance had blinded him to fundamental weaknesses. Unbeknownst to him, Arya had acquired significant shares in his consulting firm through a chain of trusts and shell companies. The result? Key management decisions, restructuring directives, and performance reviews, all strategically timed, began exposing incompetence at the top. Clients lost confidence, and within weeks, 2 major partnerships dissolved. Board members whispered about a hidden hand destabilizing the firm, but none could trace it back to her. Talia, meanwhile, had overextended her boutique hotel empire, confident that Arya's grief had left her powerless. She had neglected operational audits and ignored advice from investors. Arya's discreet influence, insider audits, strategic financial reviews, and the quiet reshaping of Talia's funding networks caused multiple projects to fail. Investors pulled out, partnerships dissolved, and reputations soured. Neither Dorian nor Talia ever suspected her involvement. That had been the key: patience and subtlety. Arya had learned that power wasn't always about confrontation. Sometimes, it was about the slow, inevitable erosion of overconfidence. One evening, Arya caught a news segment covering Dorian's firm. He appeared on camera, flustered, forced to answer questions about lost contracts and dissatisfied clients. His charm had vanished, replaced by desperation. In the same segment, Talia's hotel chain was referenced as a cautionary tale in a business journal, cited for rapid expansion without oversight. Arya's lips curved into a serene smile. Justice, at last, had been served. Still, the victories weren't only external. Arya felt the deepest transformation within herself. She remembered the nights in the hospital, gripping her mother's hand, tears streaming, heartbreaking as Liara whispered the instructions that would change her life. She had mourned, yes, but she had also grown. She reflected on the lessons learned. Grief could be debilitating, but it could also awaken resilience. Betrayal could shatter trust, but it could also reveal hidden strengths. Patience was not weakness. Strategy was not cruelty. The greatest power lay in self-mastery, in turning pain into knowledge and knowledge into action. Arya thought of the moments she had observed Dorian and Talia, silent and calculating, letting them believe she was broken while she quietly set the pieces in place. She realized she had outgrown anger. It was now a tool, not a chain. Her mother's voice echoed in memory, "When the storm comes, you stand. You are stronger than you know." Arya finally understood its full meaning. Strength was not in revenge alone, but in the transformation that came after. The ability to rise, empowered and self-directed, from the ruins left by betrayal. Arya moved to her office, overlooking the city below, a notebook open on her desk. She wrote a letter, not for Dorian, not for Talia, but for herself, and for the young women her scholarship fund would empower. Betrayal may seem to define you. Grief may feel endless. But your choices, your patience, your wisdom, your courage, define who you truly are. And always, strategize. Protect yourself. Transform pain into power. Build, create, inspire. She paused, letting the words sink in. Her mother's guidance, her inheritance, her own resilience, they had given her more than money. They had given her agency, perspective, and purpose. For the first time since Liara's death, Arya felt complete. She didn't crave vengeance because she had already achieved justice in the quietest, most effective way possible. Her life was now hers to direct, her mother's legacy honored through tangible impact, and her future limitless. Outside, the city buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet storm Arya had orchestrated behind the scenes. But that didn't matter. She wasn't watching for acknowledgement or applause. She was watching for results, for growth, for the lives she could touch through her influence. That was the true measure of power. And as the sun set, casting amber light across the skyline, Arya Nominee stood in the penthouse, not as a grieving daughter or a betrayed wife, but as a woman transformed, resilient, wise, and unstoppable. The storm had passed. She had stood. And in standing, she had discovered her true strength. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.